The expanded university, imaginative and boundless. References are brought to you by our personal collection of books, the Cardass Library. Over the years, I've seen many conversations on the order in which one should read Star Wars books. Since I was asked what my suggested reading order is, I decided to make a video on it. The first challenge was coming up with an exhaustive list. I thought this would be easy, but it wasn't. I knew my starting point and my terminus, but the books in between proved to be problematic. First, I decided I could make the first video on classic trilogy characters. So the eras in scope for this video are Late Rise of the Empire, which ends as A New Hope begins, Rebellion, which encompasses the classic trilogy, The New Republic, starting after Return of the Jedi and lasting until the Yuuzhan Vong invasion 21 years later. The New Jedi Order then lasts 12 years, from 25 years after the Battle of Yavin, or ABY, until the Legacy Era, which starts 37 years after the Battle of Yavin. The second thing I decided was that only books are in scope. Comics, games, and short stories, at least those not collected in some of the following books, and other prose will come in a later installment of Expanded University. Books are the most accessible and wouldn't leave people trying to hunt down difficult-to-find publications. After later editions of suggested reading order, we can attempt to combine them into a monster list. The following represents several hours of thought, arrangement, more thought, rearrangement, and then more intense thought and more rearrangement. This list is by no means chronological. In fact, I recommend not reading the books in chronological order. Due to the publication of Bantam-era books out of order in the timeline, it makes sense to read certain books before others, even though they occur later in the timeline. My opinion of books also moves them down the list, where they can be read later as supplemental material. I will provide my reasoning for each entry. Here we go. In my opinion, any list would be questionable if it were not to include the original Thrawn trilogy as the starting point to expanded universe reading. Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command are the three books in the trilogy, all written by Timothy Zahn. The story picks up, logically, 5 years after Return of the Jedi. Since they were the first books, excluding Marvel Comics, to explore the characters after the films, it gives readers the tone of the EU and sets the baseline. The story itself is great and doesn't just feel like Star Wars. It is Star Wars. The next entry was a difficult one. I gave the Jedi Academy trilogy, comprised of Jedi Search, Dark Apprentice, and Champions of the Force by Kevin J. Anderson, a very low rating in EU Book Club last year. There are bright spots in the trilogy, and I liked the concept of Luke building a new academy, but the story can be silly at times, and the books are edited together in a really jarring way. With that being said, some essential events do occur and new characters are set up. Soldier through it and be ready for books to improve by leaps and bounds. Shadows of the Empire was a huge multimedia event in 1996. It was a movie without a movie, so to speak. A novel, comic, game, toys, and even a soundtrack made up the project. Since characters appear in later works, I recommend reading it at this point. I felt like the story was good, but I am not a big fan of Steve Perry's writing style in the book. Even so, give it a read. Many people love it. The 9-book original X-Wing series features novels that are some of my favorite in all the EU. Ostensibly based on the PC game of the same name, the books star Wedge Antilles and feature ensemble casts of interesting new characters that form relationships that are realistically depicted. Galaxy-spanning events take place, characters die, and some of the new characters are established as EU mainstays. The humor, especially in the Alston entries, is genuinely funny. There are callbacks to many of the books we've already listed in this video, including characters and locations. The last 2 books take place several years after the first 7, but you need to read the series through to keep the characters fresh in your mind. Michael A. Stackpole and Aaron Alston wrote 5 and 4 books in the series, respectively. Next up was an interesting experiment called I, Jedi by the aforementioned Michael A. Stackpole. Having read the Jedi Academy trilogy and the X-Wing books is essential to maximum enjoyment of this book. It's written in first person from the perspective of Corran Horn from the X-Wing books. For part of the book, it shows some of the scenes from the Jedi Academy trilogy books from his point of view. Interestingly, not all the students were named in the prior books, so fitting him in works. It is a fun, quest-style book with some unorthodox storytelling techniques. In the Corellian trilogy, there are story and character developments that take place that are important to many later books, making the books in the trilogy essential reads. They are Ambush at Corellia, Assault at Salonia, and Showdown at Centerpoint. The books, by Roger McBride Allen, are of higher quality than Jedi Academy, but still not great in my opinion. I enjoyed the world building of the previously unseen Corellian system. There are some characters and situations from previous books that appear, but those books have not been in the list yet because I feel they are not important enough and not good enough. In the end, there would be little advantage in including them this early in the list. At this point, we will run back the timeline to pre-Yavin and read both Han Solo trilogies. The first trilogy by Brian Daley was written in the late 70s and has a very authentic feel both character and universe-wise. The second trilogy, written in 1997 by Ann Crispin, is an origin story for the Corellian rogue. The story is interesting, emotional, and full of action. The series has references to the Corellian trilogy. There is even an appearance by Boba Fett. The Hand of Thrawn duology by Timothy Zahn closed out the Bantam era in the timeline in 1998 and did so in a satisfying way. Comprised of Spectre of the Past and Vision of the Future, it was a story with a galaxy-spanning crisis, involved many EU characters, and has some great callbacks. At the end, the sense of a new era is tangible. In the timeline, 6 years later, the New Jedi Order series takes place. Launching the Del Rey era in 1999, the first book in the series, Vector Prime by R.A. Salvatore, depicts the beginning of an invasion from an extragalactic species, the Yuuzhan Vong. The series would continue for an unprecedented 19 novels. I remember the series originally being promoted as a 24-book series, and some of the missing books are accounted for, such as Michael Jan Friedman's canceled Nightfall trilogy. The Del Rey publishing period saw books with tighter continuity and more linear storytelling. The NJO series featured many prominent deaths, the growth of characters, and a truly changing galaxy. There were many callbacks, even to books as far back as Daley's Han Solo trilogy. Not every book in the series is great, but they are definitely worth reading for the plot and characters. You get to see Luke Skywalker, as he was meant to be seen. Next up is the Dark Nest trilogy by Troy Denning, The Joiner King, The Unseen Queen, and The Swarm War. The story takes place several years after the conclusion of the NJO. The Jedi and the Solo Skywalker family are faced with new dilemmas. There are some very interesting references to the films, as the trilogy was the first to be released after Revenge of the Sith. Once again, several years later in the timeline, the 9-book Legacy of the Force series starts. The books were rotated between Aaron Alston, Karen Travis, and Troy Denning. I recently started rereading the series, and it is nothing short of amazing. There are definite parallels to the prequel trilogy and Darth Vader's path in general, but it is definitely not a repeat of the story. By now in the Del Rey era, each series was like watching a new season of a TV series. A few years later in the Fate of the Jedi series, a character from the Bantam era has gained control of the Galactic Alliance, The Jedi are branded as undesirables, and ancient enemies return to threaten the galaxy. The series subbed Christy Golden for Karen Travis, but Aaron Alston and Troy Denning returned. X-Wing Mercy Kill was the first and only X-Wing novel set during the Del Rey era. Aaron Alston returned to the series to write this story, which covers Wraith Squadron's role in capturing conspirators attempting to take over the Galactic Alliance during Fate of the Jedi. The book takes place shortly after the series. This was Alston's last Star Wars book before he passed away a few years later. Crucible, which occurs the next year, 45 years after the Battle of Yavin, features Han, Luke, and Leia in their oldest depiction in flesh and blood. They head to the Outer Rim to help out their old friend Lando, who needs some help with pirates. They uncover a plot by two Kalumai, who have turned their genius minds to criminal activities to take over the galactic economy. There are also possible connections to the 2008 Clone Wars animated series. Troy Denning authored the book, which would be his last entry in the universe. The books in the Lando Calrissian trilogy by L. Neil Smith were released over the last half of 1983 after Return of the Jedi came out. As with the Han Solo novels from several years before, Lando was moved to a territory outside the Empire proper. The stories can be bizarre, but Smith got Lando right. I remember seeing these on the book racks at a local grocery store growing up, but I didn't get them until I found them in used bookstores in the early 90s. Quick, essential reads for Lando fans and Star Wars fans in general. Last in the main list is the Dark Forces trilogy by William C. Dietz with art by Dean Williams. The three books, Soldier for the Empire, Rebel Agent, and Jedi Knight, adapt and expand the story of the video games Dark Forces and Jedi Knight. Former Imperial Kyle Katarn defects to the Rebel Alliance and becomes an operative undertaking dangerous missions. His path leads him to the Force. Here is the final list. The remaining books in this list are ordered by the same criteria as above: relevance, quality, publication date, and of least importance, where they fall in the timeline. In theory, the last books in this list should be the least relevant to continuity and the worst. Feel free, as you read the expanded universe, to return to this video and press pause. Before reading a book, check resources to see when it is supposed to take place and be mindful of that as you read. I feel this list will bring a reader maximum enjoyment as they go through the Star Wars expanded universe. In some ways, and although this list is not strictly by publication date, new readers will experience it as we the original readers did. Bookmark this video and keep it as you begin or re-experience the EU. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with some or all these placements. Please check the playlist for all expanded university videos and subscribe to the channel.